The emergency transmission crackled through space, its signal weak and desperate as it reached the outer monitoring stations of the Terran defense grid. Ambassador Zalthara of the Volani Republic clutched the communication device with her 4 delicate hands, her translucent blue skin pale with fear and exhaustion. Behind her, the bridge of her diplomatic vessel shuddered under another impact from the pursuing Krogar warships. "Please," she whispered into the transmitter, her voice barely audible above the alarms. "This is Ambassador Zalthara of the Volani Republic. Our worlds burn. Our people die. We have nowhere else to turn. The Galactic Council has abandoned us. You are our final hope." On the receiving end, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun sat in the communication center of Luna Station, Earth's primary deep space monitoring facility. She had been tracking the deteriorating situation in the Andromeda spiral for weeks, watching as the Krogar Dominion systematically conquered peaceful worlds with ruthless efficiency. The Volani were just the latest victims in a campaign of terror that had already claimed 17 civilizations. "Ma'am," Chun said, turning to Admiral Rebecca Torres, who had arrived moments earlier. "It's another distress call from the Andromeda spiral. The Volani Republic this time. They're requesting immediate military assistance." Admiral Torres was a veteran of 3 interstellar conflicts, her weathered face bearing the scars of battles fought in the void between stars. She studied the tactical display showing the Krogar advance, her expression grim. The alien empire had been expanding aggressively for the past 5 years, crushing anyone who stood in their way. Their technology was advanced, their tactics brutal, and their hunger for conquest seemingly endless. "What's the status of the Galactic Council?" Torres asked, though she already suspected the answer. "No response to Volani pleas for the past 6 months," Chin replied. "Intelligence suggests the Council races are too afraid to act. The Krogar have made examples of anyone who opposes them." Torres nodded slowly. The Galactic Council had always been a loose confederation of advanced species, more focused on trade and diplomacy than military action. When faced with a genuine threat, they often proved toothless. Humanity had learned this lesson during the Centauri crisis 20 years ago when the Council stood by while human colonies burned. "Admiral," Chun continued, "there's something else. Our long-range sensors are detecting Krogar fleet movements toward the Perseus Arm. If they continue their current trajectory, they'll reach human space within 2 years," Torres finished. She stared at the star map, calculating distances and fleet dispositions. The mathematics were clear. If the Krogar weren't stopped now, humanity would face them alone when they inevitably turned toward Earth. The Admiral activated her personal communicator. "This is Torres. Emergency session, all department heads. War Room Alpha in 30 minutes. She paused, then added, "And get me a direct line to President Harrison." As the communication ended, Torres looked back at the display showing Zalthara's vessel, now barely staying ahead of its pursuers. The Volani had been among the first alien species to make peaceful contact with humanity 50 years ago. They had shared their knowledge of faster-than-light communication and offered friendship when many other species viewed humans with suspicion or outright hostility. Now, they were dying, and they had turned to the species most other galactic civilizations still considered dangerous primitives from a death world. An hour later, the War Room Alpha buzzed with activity as Earth's top military commanders, scientists, and intelligence officers gathered around the holographic display table. President Maria Harrison's image flickered in from New Geneva, her expression serious as she listened to the briefings. "Current intelligence shows the Krogar Dominion has a fleet of approximately 800 capital ships," reported General Marcus Webb, head of Terran Intelligence. "They've conquered 17 star systems in the past 18 months, enslaving populations and strip mining worlds for resources." "What about their military capabilities?" asked Admiral Torres. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, head of Xenotechnology Research, activated her own display. "Krogar ships are heavily armored and armed with plasma-based weaponry. They're larger than our vessels on average, but our analysis suggests they're also slower and less maneuverable. Their shields are powerful, but operate on a different frequency than our own." "Weaknesses?" President Harrison's voice carried across the room. "They appear to rely heavily on overwhelming force rather than tactical sophistication." Dr. Reeves continued. "Their formation flying is rigid, their command structure hierarchical to the point of inflexibility. They've won through superior numbers and firepower, not superior strategy. Fleet Admiral James Morrison, the highest-ranking military officer present, leaned forward. How many ships can we field? Current active fleet stands at 412 capital ships, Torres replied. Another 200 in reserve or undergoing refit. We could have 600 ships ready for deployment within 4 weeks. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the numbers. Even with every ship humanity could muster, they would still be outnumbered. There's another factor to consider, said Dr. Sarah Kim, the chief xenopsychologist. Every intelligence report suggests the Krogar view other species as inherently inferior. They've never faced serious resistance from anyone they've attacked. They may not be prepared for an enemy that fights back effectively. President Harrison's image leaned back in her chair. Admiral Torres, what's your assessment? Torres stood, her command bearing evident as she addressed the room. Madam President, the Krogar represent a clear and present danger to human space. If we allow them to continue their expansion unchecked, we'll face them eventually under much worse circumstances. The Volani request for aid presents an opportunity to engage them while we still have potential allies and before they can consolidate their gains. You're recommending we go to war, Harrison said. It wasn't a question. I'm recommending we answer a call for help from an ally while protecting our own long-term interests, Torres replied. The Krogar have shown no interest in negotiation or coexistence. They will come for us eventually. Better to face them now, on our terms, than wait for them to choose the time and place. The debate that followed was intense, but brief. Every analysis pointed to the same conclusion. The Krogar expansion would eventually threaten human space, and delaying action would only make the eventual confrontation more costly. Very well, President Harrison said finally. Admiral Torres, you have authorization to deploy the fleet to assist the Volani Republic. Rules of engagement, full military intervention, Madam President. We're not going to half-measure this. As the meeting disbanded and orders began flowing through the chain of command, Torres remained in the war room, staring at the tactical display. She thought about the last time humanity had gone to war on this scale, during the Centauri crisis. Back then, they had been fighting to protect human colonies. Now, they were preparing to travel thousands of light years to fight for aliens most humans had never even seen. But that was what separated humanity from species like the Krogar. Humans had a saying that Torres had always believed in. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. The Krogar had counted on the galaxy doing nothing. They were about to discover that Deathworlders had different ideas about standing by while innocents suffered. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, Ambassador Zalthara's vessel finally succumbed to the pursuing Krogar ships. As her ship was tractored aboard the enemy flagship, she clutched a small recording device containing detailed intelligence about Krogar fleet movements and tactics. Her message to Earth had been more than a plea for help. It had been an intelligence delivery that would prove crucial in the coming conflict. Across human space, shipyards that had been producing merchant vessels and exploration ships began retooling for war production. The mothballed shipyards of Mars roared back to life, their automated systems beginning the process of constructing the largest battle fleet in human history. In the outer colonies, colonial militias received activation orders. Veterans of the Centauri crisis came out of retirement to train new recruits. Civilian transport vessels were requisitioned and converted into auxiliary cruisers. But perhaps most importantly, word began to spread through the underground networks of the oppressed species in Krogar space. The humans were coming. The Deathworlders who had never lost a war, who treated their allies as equals rather than subjects, who had once fought a galactic superpower to a standstill over the principle that sentient beings had the right to choose their own destiny. They were coming to fight the Krogar. The resistance movements that had been slowly dying under Krogar oppression suddenly found new hope. Sabotage operations that had been mere pinpricks became coordinated campaigns. Intelligence flowed back toward human space through a dozen different channels, all carrying the same message. The conquered peoples were ready to rise up if someone would stand with them. Dr. Reeves worked around the clock with her team, analyzing every piece of Krogar technology they could acquire. Their weapons, their shields, their armor, all of it had strengths and weaknesses. The key was finding ways to turn human advantages in speed and maneuverability into tactical victories against superior numbers. The breakthrough came when they analyzed a Krogar shield generator recovered from a battle 6 months earlier. The aliens used a rotating frequency system that made their shields incredibly efficient against energy weapons. But the rotation pattern was predictable. A properly timed kinetic strike could punch through when the shields were at their weakest point. Human weapons designers had always favored kinetic systems anyway, a legacy of fighting in the asteroid fields where energy weapons were less effective. Now that preference would become a crucial advantage. Admiral Torres stood in the observation deck of the UES Defiance, humanity's newest and most powerful battleship. Around her, the largest fleet in human history was assembling. Ships arrived daily from every corner of human space, their crews eager for the fight ahead. She thought about the message she would soon send to the Krogar Dominion, the one that would announce humanity's entry into the war. It would be broadcast on all frequencies, translated into every known language, sent to every corner of the galaxy. The message was simple. You asked for genocide. Deathworlders answered with liberation. As the final ships arrived and took their positions in the massive formation, Torres smiled. The Krogar had built their empire on the assumption that no one would fight back effectively. They had counted on fear and overwhelming force to cow their enemies into submission. They had never faced humans before. The fleet began its jump to hyperspace, carrying with it the hopes of a dozen oppressed species and the fury of a race that had never learned to abandon their friends. Behind them, Earth's orbital shipyards continued their frantic construction pace, building the reinforcements that would be needed for the long war ahead. In the depths of space, the first shots of what would become known as the Liberation War were about to be fired. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when someone called the Deathworlders for help. They were about to discover that humans didn't just answer calls for aid. They answered them with overwhelming force and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The Krogar fleet hung in space like a swarm of metallic predators, their dark hulls bristling with weapon ports as they maintained blockade positions around the Volani homeworld of Thesha Prime. Commander Kroktar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Fist, watching the orbital bombardment platforms reduce another Volani city to slag and ash. The blue-white beams carved through atmosphere and architecture alike, painting the planet's surface with fire. Status report, Kroktar growled, his mandibles clicking together in satisfaction. The Volani had held out longer than most species, but their resistance was finally crumbling. Soon, another world would bow to the Dominion. Planetary Defense Grid is at 15% operational capacity, reported his tactical officer. Estimated completion of pacification operations in 6 standard rotations. Kroktar nodded, his 6 eyes focused on the tactical display. The Volani had been surprisingly resourceful, their crystalline technology proving more resilient than expected. But resilience meant nothing against overwhelming firepower. It never did. Commander, the communications officer suddenly called out, "We're receiving a transmission on all frequencies. Origin unknown." "Display it," Kroktar commanded, turning toward the main screen. The image that appeared made his mandibles stop clicking. A human female in an unfamiliar military uniform stood before what appeared to be the bridge of a warship. Her species was known to the Krogar, the barbaric primitives from the Rim who had somehow developed space travel despite coming from a death world. They were considered a minor curiosity, too far away to be worth conquering and too primitive to be worth trading with. "I am Admiral Rebecca Torres of the Terran Defense Force," the human said, her voice calm and measured. "You are in violation of interstellar law regarding the targeting of civilian populations. You have 30 minutes to cease bombardment operations and withdraw your forces from Volani space." The bridge fell silent. Several officers made sounds that might have been laughter in other circumstances, but Kroktar's expression remained serious. Something about the human's tone bothered him. "Admiral," the human continued, "I'm sure you're wondering why primitives from a distant Rim world are making demands of the mighty Krogar Dominion. Allow me to clarify our position." The image shifted, showing a tactical display of local space. Kroktar's eyes widened as he saw the sensor readings. Hundreds of ships were dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, their formations precise and their approach vectors calculated for maximum tactical advantage. "The Volani Republic requested aid," Torres continued. Deathworlders answered, "You have 30 minutes to comply, or we will remove you from this system by force." The transmission ended, leaving Kroktar staring at a tactical situation that had transformed from a routine conquest into something entirely different. His fleet of 200 ships was formidable, but the approaching human force appeared to number nearly 400 vessels. Analysis, he ordered. Scanning the approaching fleet now, his tactical officer replied, manipulating controls with trembling claws. Ships are unusual design, smaller than our vessels on average, but numerous. I'm reading advanced stealth capabilities, and Commander, their approach vectors suggest they have detailed knowledge of our formation. Kroktar's mandibles began clicking rapidly, a sign of stress that his crew had rarely seen. How is that possible? His question was answered moments later when a new voice came through the communication system, one speaking perfect Krogar. Commander Kroktar, this is Ambassador Zalthara of the Volani Republic. I trust you remember capturing my vessel 6 rotations ago. The Krogar commander's eyes narrowed. The Volani ambassador had been interrogated and then imprisoned aboard his flagship. She was supposed to be in a detention cell. Before your people captured me, Zalthara continued, I transmitted detailed intelligence to our new human allies. Formation patterns, ship capabilities, tactical doctrines, command structures, everything. Did you really think we would call for help without providing the information needed to make that help effective? Kroktar spun toward his security chief. How is the prisoner communicating? Unclear, Commander. All communication devices were removed from her cell. The Volani have biotechnology you never suspected, Zalthara's voice said, seeming to come from the walls themselves. But that's not your immediate problem. Your immediate problem is that you have 27 minutes remaining to comply with Admiral Torres' demands. On the tactical display, the human fleet was spreading into attack formation, their ships moving with a precision that suggested extensive combat experience. Kroktar had fought many species, but he had never seen fleet maneuvers quite like these. The humans moved like a school of predatory fish, each ship responding instantly to the movements of its neighbors. Commander, his tactical officer called out, I'm detecting weapons charging on the human vessels. Power signatures are significant. How significant? Their primary weapons appear to be kinetic-based rather than energy-based. Railguns of some kind, but the power levels suggest projectile velocities far beyond what we've encountered before. Kroktar considered his options. Retreat was unthinkable. The Dominion did not withdraw from inferior species. But the tactical situation was rapidly becoming untenable. His ships were designed for overwhelming weaker opponents, not fighting a peer adversary. Open a channel to the human admiral, he commanded. Torres' image reappeared on the screen, her expression unchanged. Commander Kroktar, I trust you've had time to assess your situation. Human, Kroktar said, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had conquered dozens of worlds. You mistake our surprise for weakness. The Krogar Dominion does not negotiate with primitives. I wasn't negotiating, Torres replied calmly. I was giving you a chance to preserve your forces for another day. That chance expires in 23 minutes. You face the finest fleet in this sector of space, Kroktar continued. Our ships are larger, our weapons more powerful, our armor stronger. What makes you think your primitive vessels can challenge us? Torres smiled, and something in that expression made Kroktar's mandibles stop clicking entirely. Commander, you've been fighting species that evolved on garden worlds with blue skies and gentle rains and 2 seasons. You've been conquering peoples who see violence as aberrant and war as an unfortunate necessity. The human admiral paused, her smile fading. We're from a death world, Commander. We evolved dodging meteors and volcanic eruptions. We learned warfare fighting each other in environments that would kill your people in minutes. We've been fighting for our entire existence, and we've gotten very, very good at it. The tactical display showed the human fleet completing its deployment. Each ship was now in optimal firing position, their formation creating overlapping fields of fire that would make any escape attempt costly. 19 minutes, Commander, Torres said. Choose wisely. The transmission ended, leaving Kroktar staring at his tactical display. For the first time in his career, he was facing an enemy that outnumbered him, outmaneuvered him, and appeared to have superior intelligence about his capabilities. Commander, his weapons officer called out, the bombardment platforms are requesting orders. Should we continue surface operations? Kroktar looked at the planet below, where Volani cities still burned under his guns. Then he looked at the approaching human fleet, calculating distances and firing solutions. If he continued the bombardment, his ships would be vulnerable to attack while their weapons were focused planetward. Cease bombardment, he ordered. All ships, Defensive Formation Course 7. Prepare for battle. As his fleet maneuvered into defensive positions, Kroktar opened a private channel to his tactical officer. Assessment of human capabilities? Unknown, Commander. Their ships don't match any known design patterns. Smaller than ours, but their power signatures suggest they pack more firepower per ton than should be possible. Crew experience? Also unknown, but their formation flying suggests extensive combat training. Kroktar clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The Krogar had built their empire on superior technology and overwhelming numbers. They had never faced an enemy that might actually be superior in either category. Time to minimum effective range. 14 minutes at current approach speed. Across the void, Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching her fleet's approach on the tactical display. The Krogar formation was textbook, strong defensive positions with overlapping fields of fire. It would be effective against most opponents. Admiral, Captain Rodriguez said from the weapons station, all ships report ready for combat. Kinetic batteries charged, point defense online. Thank you, Captain. Torres activated the fleet communication system. All ships, this is Admiral Torres. You've all studied the intelligence provided by Ambassador Zalthara. The Krogar rely on superior firepower and heavy armor. They've never faced an enemy that emphasizes speed and precision. She paused, looking at the tactical display where over 300 human ships prepared for battle. Our advantages are mobility, superior training, and weapons specifically designed to penetrate their defenses. Use them. Make every shot count. And remember, there are 12 billion Vallani civilians on that planet counting on us. The response was immediate and uniform. Understood, Admiral. Torres turned to her tactical officer. Commander Park, execute Battle Plan Alpha. All ships, engage at will when we reach optimal range. The human fleet surged forward, accelerating far beyond what the Krogar had expected. Their ships weren't just faster in hyperspace. They were faster in normal space as well, their engines producing thrust-to-weight ratios that seemed impossible for vessels of their size. Kroktar watched the approaching fleet with growing unease. They're accelerating beyond safe parameters, his tactical officer reported. At that rate, they'll suffer significant structural stress. Unless their ships are built to withstand forces we've never encountered, Kroktar replied grimly. Deathworld primitives would naturally build their vessels to survive extreme conditions. 9 minutes to firing range, the tactical officer announced. Prepare to fire on my command, Kroktar ordered. Full spread, all batteries. Show these primitives the price of challenging the Dominion. But, even as he gave the orders, Kroktar couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. The humans approached with the confidence of a species that had never learned to fear superior numbers. Their formation suggested they had a plan beyond simply trading shots with his heavier vessels. Commander, the communications officer called out, I'm detecting transmissions between the human ships. They're using some kind of quantum-encrypted tactical network. Content, indecipherable. But the frequency suggests constant tactical updates. Krok_Tar's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The humans weren't just coordinating their attack. They were sharing real-time targeting data across their entire fleet. Each ship would have the benefit of sensor data from hundreds of others. All ships, he ordered, prepare for evasive maneuvers. The enemy may have superior coordination capabilities, but it was already too late. The human fleet had closed to optimal range, and Admiral Torres was about to demonstrate what happened when Deathworlders went to war. All ships, Torres commanded, fire. Space erupted in fire and metal as the greatest space battle in galactic history began. The first salvo from the human fleet struck like the fist of an angry god. Thousands of tungsten steel projectiles, each the size of a small spacecraft, and accelerated to 20% of light speed, crossed the void between the opposing forces in seconds. The Krogar had expected energy weapons, plasma bolts, and particle beams that their shields were designed to deflect. Instead, they faced a storm of kinetic death that their defenses were never meant to handle. The first Krogar vessel to die was the heavy cruiser Dominator's Pride. 3 railgun projectiles struck within milliseconds of each other, timing their impacts to coincide with the rotating frequency gaps in the alien shields. The first projectile punched through the lowered shields, the second shattered the ship's primary armor belt, and the third penetrated deep into the vessel's core, detonating the main reactor. The explosion was visible across the entire battlefield, a brief star that outshone the system's primary for several seconds. Commander Kroktar felt the Dominion's fist shudder as projectiles streaked past, their passage close enough to trigger proximity alarms. "Return fire," he roared. "All batteries, maximum spread." The Krogar response was immediate and devastating, or would have been against any other opponent. Plasma bolts capable of melting asteroids lanced out toward the human fleet, their brilliant purple-white beams drawing lethal lines across space. But where they expected to find human ships, they found only empty void. "Impossible," whispered the tactical officer. "They're moving too fast. No ship that size should be able to maneuver like that." The human vessels danced through the Krogar fire like fighters rather than capital ships, their hulls gleaming as they rolled and spun to present minimal target profiles. Each ship seemed to know exactly where the enemy fire would be, sliding through gaps in the plasma barrage with precision that spoke of either incredible skill or impossible luck. Admiral Torres watched the tactical display from the bridge of the Defiance, her expression calm despite the chaos erupting around her fleet. "Captain Rodriguez, status report. Direct hits on 7 Krogar vessels for confirmed kills," Rodriguez replied, his fingers flying over the tactical controls. "The enemy is having difficulty tracking our movements. Their targeting systems appear designed for slower, more predictable opponents." "Excellent. Continue evasive pattern Delta 7 and prepare for second salvo." The human fleet speed wasn't just about their engines, though the gravity manipulation drives were far in advance of anything the Krogar possessed. It was about training and doctrine developed over decades of fighting in the chaos of Earth's asteroid belt, where a moment's hesitation or a clumsy maneuver meant death by impact or radiation. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, tactical officer aboard the destroyer UES Relentless, felt the familiar weight of 8 Gs pressing her into her acceleration couch as her ship spun through a particularly complex evasion sequence. Around her, the crew worked with the fluid precision of a team that had trained together for years in environments most species would consider uninhabitable. "Target lock on Krogar cruiser, bearing 27 Mark IV, called out Ensign Martinez from the weapons console. "Confirmed target," Kim replied, checking her tactical display. The enemy ship was part of a 3-vessel formation trying to concentrate fire on the human battle group. "Wait for the coordinated strike signal." Across the human fleet, similar conversations were taking place as hundreds of ships maneuvered for optimal firing positions. The quantum-encrypted tactical network that linked every vessel meant that each captain could see the battlefield from the perspective of the entire fleet. When the second salvo came, it would be perfectly coordinated. "All ships," Admiral Torres' voice came through the fleet communication system, "execute hammer strike in 5 seconds. Mark." The second human volley was even more devastating than the first. Every ship in the fleet fired simultaneously, their projectiles timed to arrive at their targets within milliseconds of each other. The Krogar watched in horror as their formations were systematically dismantled, with multiple ships targeting each enemy vessel to ensure kills rather than merely damage. The heavy cruiser Vengeful Talon lasted 3 seconds under the concentrated fire of 7 human destroyers. The battleship Eternal Dominion, pride of the Krogar Third Fleet, found itself targeted by 12 human cruisers and simply ceased to exist in a flash of nuclear fire. But the Krogar were not helpless prey. As the third salvo approached, Commander Kroktar had finally adapted to the new tactical situation. "All ships, random evasion protocols. Don't let them predict our movements." The Krogar fleet scattered, abandoning their tight formations in favor of individual ship maneuvers. Their return fire became less coordinated, but more unpredictable, and several human vessels found themselves caught by plasma bolts they couldn't evade. The destroyer UES Yorktown took a direct hit amidships, her hull breached, and her crew fighting desperately to maintain structural integrity. The cruiser UES Intrepid lost her forward weapons array to a particularly well-placed shot, though her crew managed to maintain the ship's combat effectiveness. "Damage report," Admiral Torres called out as the Defiant shook under a near miss. "Fleet-wide casualties at 7%, Captain Rodriguez reported. But enemy losses are approaching 40%. Their formations are breaking up." Torres nodded, studying the tactical display. The Krogar were learning, adapting their tactics to counter human advantages. But they were learning too late and at too high a cost. More importantly, They had made a critical error in spreading their fleet. All ships, she commanded, execute wolf pack protocols, break into squadron formation, and engage independently. What had begun as a fleet engagement suddenly transformed into dozens of smaller battles as the human ships split into coordinated hunting groups. Each squadron consisted of one heavy cruiser supported by 3 or 4 destroyers, combinations that had proven devastatingly effective during humanity's conflicts in the asteroid belts. The Krogar had never faced tactics like these. Their doctrine emphasized massive fleet engagements where superior firepower could be brought to bear. Fighting multiple simultaneous smaller battles required a level of tactical flexibility their rigid command structure couldn't provide. Squadron Commander Lisa Park, aboard the cruiser UES Thunderbolt, led her 4-ship group in pursuit of a damaged Krogar battleship that had been separated from its escorts. Elm, bring us around to her stern quarter. Weapons, prepare penetrator rounds. The Krogar vessel, Fist of the Conqueror, tried desperately to bring its main guns to bear, but the human ships were too fast and too maneuverable. They struck like wolves, hitting and fading, always staying in the enemy's blind spots where their heavy weapons couldn't track. Direct hit on their engine section, reported the weapons officer. Their acceleration is dropping. Excellent. Continue the attack pattern. Don't give them time to recover. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, the Krogar had managed to surround a single human destroyer, the UES Defiant. Captain James Shawn found his ship facing 3 enemy cruisers, their combined firepower enough to vaporize his vessel in seconds. Sir, called out his tactical officer, we're outnumbered 3-1. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Chin smiled grimly. Negative. We're not running from these bastards. He activated the ship's communication system. All hands, this is the captain. We're about to show these aliens why Earth builds its ships tough. The Defiant charged directly at the nearest Krogar cruiser, her engines at maximum power, and her hull glowing from the heat of atmospheric friction as she passed through the edge of Thesha Prime's atmosphere. The alien ship fired everything it had, but the human vessel's armor was designed to survive impacts in the asteroid belt, where collisions routinely involve masses moving at interplanetary speeds. Plasma bolts that would have crippled other vessels scarred the Defiant's hull, but failed to penetrate her layered armor. The ship emerged from the barrage like an ancient knight emerging from a hail of arrows, damaged but intact and deadly. Ram them, Chin ordered. Sir, his helmsman asked. You heard me. Full speed, dead center of their hull. The Defiant struck the Krogar cruiser like a guided missile, her reinforced bow punching deep into the enemy's hull before her reactor overloaded. The resulting explosion took both ships and sent shock waves through the surrounding space that disabled one of the remaining Krogar vessels. Across the battlefield, human crews watched the destruction of the Defiant and felt the cold fury that had made their species the most feared warriors in their corner of space. The Krogar had just learned that humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to make sure their enemies paid the highest possible price for victory. All squadrons, Admiral Torres' voice carried across the fleet communication network. The Defiant's crew has shown us the way. No quarter. Make them pay for every meter of space. The battle's tempo increased as human squadrons pressed their attacks with renewed ferocity. Ships that would normally withdraw when damaged instead closed with their enemies, trading their lives for maximum destruction. It was a level of tactical aggression the Krogar had never encountered. Commander Kroktar, watching his fleet dissolve around him, finally understood what his people had stumbled into. These weren't just another species to be conquered. They were predators from a world that had forged them in violence and taught them that survival meant being willing to pay any price for victory. Commander, his communications officer called out, the flagship of their fleet is approaching our position directly. On his tactical display, Kroktar could see the massive human battleship cutting through the melee like a blade, her weapons methodically destroying any Krogar vessel that tried to intercept her. She was coming for him specifically, and there was nothing his remaining ships could do to stop her. Admiral Torres, he said, opening a direct communication channel. I propose terms for surrender. The human admiral's image appeared on his screen, her expression cold as the void between stars. The time for terms was 30 minutes ago, Commander. Now we discuss only the manner of your defeat. My people will not forget this, Kroktar said. The Krogar Dominion will send fleets to burn your worlds in retaliation. Torres smiled. And something in that expression made the alien commander realize he had made a terrible miscalculation. "Commander, you seem to be under the impression that this is the extent of human military power. Let me correct that assumption." The tactical display shifted to show a wider view of local space, revealing formations of ships that hadn't yet entered the battle. Hundreds of them, waiting in reserve. "This is one battle group, Commander," Torres said quietly. "We brought 12 of them. And back in human space, our shipyards are building more. Many more." Kroktar's mandibles went slack as he absorbed the implications. The force that was destroying his fleet was just the advance guard of a military machine far larger than he had imagined. "Surrender now," Torres continued, "and we'll allow your surviving crews to evacuate. Continue fighting, and we'll show you what happens when Deathworlders stop holding back." As if to emphasize her point, the human battleship opened fire, its main guns sending tungsten projectiles through the Dominion's fist like hot knives through paper. Kroktar felt his ship dying around him as systems failed and whole breaches vented atmosphere into space. In his final moments, as the bridge's life support failed and the cold of space reached for him, Kroktar understood the magnitude of his species' error. The Krogar had built their empire on the assumption that superior force could overcome any opposition. They had never encountered an opponent that viewed superior force as merely the opening move in a much larger game. The news of the Thesha Prime massacre spread through Krogar space like wildfire, carried by the terrified survivors who had witnessed their supposedly invincible fleet reduced to debris in less than 4 hours. On Krogar Prime, the homeworld of the Dominion, Supreme Commander Vextar received the reports with growing disbelief. "Impossible," he hissed, his 12 claws scoring deep grooves in the metal surface of his command throne. "No species has ever defeated a full Krogar battle fleet. These reports must be fabricated." Fleet Commander Zorith, one of the few survivors from Thesha Prime, stood before his superior with his head bowed in shame. The escape pod that had carried him away from the destruction bore scorch marks that testified to the ferocity of the battle. "Supreme Commander, I witnessed the destruction personally. The humans possess capabilities we never suspected. Their ships move like fighters despite massing thousands of tons. Their weapons punch through our shields as if they don't exist. And their tactics..." Zorith paused, his voice trembling. "They fight like they were born in vacuum." Vextar's eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical recordings from the battle. The human ships moved in patterns that seemed almost organic, flowing around Krogar formations like water around stones. Their coordination was perfect, their timing flawless, their aggression absolute. "How many ships do they possess?" he demanded. "Unknown, Supreme Commander. The force at Thesha Prime numbered over 400 vessels, but intercepts suggest it was only one of 12 such fleets." The silence that followed was broken only by the clicking of Vextar's claws as he processed this information. If the humans possessed 12 fleets of that size, they commanded naval forces comparable to the entire Krogar Dominion. But that seemed impossible. Intelligence reports had always described humanity as a minor rim species with limited territorial holdings. "Summon the Intelligence Directorate," Vextar ordered. "I want everything we know about these humans. Everything." What the Krogar discovered over the following days painted a picture of a species unlike any they had encountered. Humanity hadn't expanded through conquest like the Dominion. They had grown through exploration and alliance building, creating a loose confederation of worlds that spanned dozens of star systems. Their military was smaller than Krogar forces in terms of total ships, but their vessels were newer, more advanced, and crewed by veterans of conflicts the Dominion had never even heard of. More disturbing were the reports coming from conquered worlds throughout Krogar space. Resistance movements that had been dormant for years were suddenly springing back to life, coordinated attacks, disrupting supply lines and communication networks. Someone was organizing the oppressed populations, and intelligence suggested that someone was human. On the occupied world of Canther 4, former mining engineer Darthek led a group of rebels through the maintenance tunnels beneath the planet's main spaceport. The Krogar had enslaved his people 18 months earlier, turning their world into a resource extraction operation. Now, armed with weapons and explosives provided by mysterious off-world allies, they were ready to strike back. "Remember," he whispered to his team, "disable the shield generators first, then target the fuel depot. Our allies will handle the rest." The attack began at precisely 0:30 300 local time, coordinated across 17 different resistance cells. Within minutes, the spaceport's defenses were offline and the fuel storage complex was burning. As Krogar security forces scrambled to respond, ships began dropping out of hyperspace above the planet, sleek vessels bearing the insignia of the Terran Defense Force. Captain Maria Santos, commanding the destroyer UES Liberator, watched the tactical display as her squadron engaged the Krogar orbital platforms. Tactical status of surface targets. Resistance forces have successfully disabled the planetary shield grid, her tactical officer reported. We have clear firing solutions on all military targets. Excellent. All ships commence bombardment. Military targets only, avoid civilian areas. The orbital bombardment was surgical in its precision, guided by intelligence provided by the resistance movements. Krogar military installations, administrative centers, and resource extraction facilities were systematically destroyed, while civilian infrastructure remained untouched. It was a demonstration of military capability that sent a clear message. Humans could strike anywhere in Krogar space, and they would distinguish between oppressors and the oppressed. Similar operations were taking place across dozens of worlds as human special forces teams worked with local resistance movements to coordinate uprisings. The Krogar suddenly found themselves fighting a multi-front war against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. Supreme Commander Vextar stood in his war room, staring at a holographic map that showed the deteriorating situation across Dominion space. Red markers indicated worlds in open rebellion. Yellow ones showed disrupted communication, and orange ones marked confirmed human fleet movements. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The humans weren't just attacking military targets. They were systematically dismantling the infrastructure that held the Dominion together. They're not trying to conquer us, he said to his assembled staff. They're trying to liberate every species we've subjugated. Fleet Admiral Korthax, the Dominion's most experienced commander, nodded grimly. Intelligence reports suggest they're in contact with resistance movements on over 200 worlds. If even half of those rise in coordinated rebellion, the Dominion falls, Vextar finished. He activated the strategic communication system. Send orders to all fleet commanders. Abandon territorial patrus. Recall all ships to primary staging areas. We're switching to Fortress Doctrine. It was a fundamental shift in Krogar strategy. Instead of maintaining control through dispersed fleet deployments, they would concentrate their forces around key worlds and dare the humans to attack heavily defended positions. It was a strategy born of desperation, but it was their only hope of preserving the Dominion's core territories. Admiral Torres received the intelligence about Krogar fleet movements aboard the command ship UES Constellation, which had become the mobile headquarters for the Human Liberation Campaign. Around her, holographic displays showed the positions of 12 human fleet groups, each one larger and more capable than the force that had destroyed the Krogar fleet at Thesha Prime. They're pulling back to fortress positions, reported Captain Williams, her intelligence chief. Major fleet concentrations at Krogar Prime, Vexthal System, and the Mordak Cluster. Casualties on our forces? Minimal, Admiral. Total losses across all operations. 15 ships destroyed, 37 damaged. Enemy losses are estimated at over 800 ships destroyed or captured. Torres nodded, studying the tactical situation. The Krogar withdrawal was exactly what she had hoped for. It would allow human forces to liberate the outer worlds while concentrating enemy forces for decisive engagement. But the fortress strategy also meant the final battles would be costly. "What's the status of our allies?" she asked. "Better than expected," Williams replied, activating new displays. The Volani have mobilized their entire remaining fleet, 230 ships. The Carthaki Republic is providing logistical support and base facilities. And we're receiving volunteers from 17 different species. The Liberation Campaign had produced an unexpected side effect. Species that had never worked together were uniting against their common oppressor. Humans were discovering that their reputation as effective warriors was drawing allies from across the galaxy, beings who saw in humanity the strength they lacked to resist Krogar oppression. On the bridge of the Volani cruiser Crystal Dawn, Ambassador Zalthara worked alongside human tactical officers to coordinate the next phase of operations. Her rescue from Krogar captivity had become a symbol of hope for oppressed species throughout the galaxy, and her intelligence about enemy capabilities had proven invaluable. The Krogar fortress at Vexthal guards their primary supply depot, she explained to the assembled commanders. If we can capture it intact, we deny them the resources needed to sustain their remaining fleets. Commander Sarah Chun, now commanding a mixed squadron of human and Volani ships, studied the tactical displays. What about defenses? Orbital weapons platforms, minefields, and at least 50 capital ships, Zalthara replied. It will be costly to take. Maybe not, Chen said thoughtfully. What if we don't take it? What if we make them come to us? The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of attacking the Krogar fortress directly, human and allied forces would establish their own fortified positions in nearby systems, cutting off supply lines and forcing the enemy to abandon their defensive positions or watch their forces slowly starve. It was a strategy that required patience and precise coordination, but it played to humanity's greatest strength, the ability to think beyond immediate tactical considerations and fight a campaign rather than individual battles. The Krogar had built their empire through superior firepower and direct confrontation. Humans would defeat them through superior logistics and strategic thinking. The siege of Vexthal began not with an attack, but with an announcement broadcast across the galaxy. Admiral Torres appeared on view screens throughout Krogar space, her message translated into dozens of languages. To all sentient beings under Krogar oppression, she said, liberation is coming. We ask for your patience as we complete the isolation of enemy forces. Soon, the Dominion's reign of terror will end. To the Krogar leadership, she had a different message. Supreme Commander Vextar, you have withdrawn your forces to fortress positions, believing this will preserve your empire. You are wrong. Every day you remain isolated. More worlds slip from your control. Every week that passes, more species join our alliance. You can surrender now with honor, or we can dismantle your empire piece by piece until nothing remains but the memory of your cruelty. Vextar received the message and his command bunkered deep beneath Krogar Prime's surface, surrounded by displays showing the steady erosion of his empire. Human forces now controlled over half of former Dominion territory, and their alliance was growing stronger every day. How long can we maintain our current positions? He asked his logistics commander. 6 months with current reserves, came the reply. Perhaps 8 if we implement strict rationing. And the humans? Their supply lines appear secure. They're receiving support from dozens of species we once considered subjugated. Vextar's mandibles clicked slowly as he contemplated his options. The humans had outmaneuvered him completely, turning the Dominion's strength into weakness and its subjects into enemies. But the Krogar still had one advantage. Their fortress worlds were heavily defended and would exact a terrible price from any attacker. Prepare the final gambit, he ordered. If we cannot preserve the Dominion, we will ensure the humans pay dearly for its destruction. Deep within the most secure facilities on Krogar Prime, technicians began activating weapons systems that had been held in reserve for the ultimate crisis. Planet-killer missiles, antimatter bombs, and, worse, weapons designed to scour entire star systems of life if the Dominion faced extinction. The Krogar were preparing for their final stand, and they intended to take as many enemies with them as possible. But they had underestimated their opponents one final time. Humans hadn't survived on a death world by accepting Pyrrhic victories, and they hadn't built an interstellar alliance by abandoning their friends to alien fury. The final battle was coming, and the Deathworlders intended to win it without losing a single allied world to Krogar desperation. The intelligence reached Admiral Torres through channels that officially didn't exist. Deep cover operatives who had spent months infiltrating Krogar command structures, resistance fighters who had sacrificed everything to plant surveillance devices in critical locations, and defectors who had grown sickened by their own government's extremism. Planet killers, Captain Williams said grimly, displaying the intercepted technical specifications on the Constellation's main tactical screen. 27 antimatter warheads, each capable of sterilizing a terrestrial world. And worse, stellar collapse devices designed to trigger supernovas. Torres studied the intelligence reports with the calm expression she had maintained throughout the campaign, but those who knew her could see the fury burning in her eyes. Confirmed targets? Thesha Prime, Carthaki, and 17 other Alliance worlds, Williams replied. They're planning to execute simultaneous strikes if human forces approach Krogar Prime. Mutually assured destruction on a galactic scale. The silence that followed was broken by Ambassador Zalthara, whose presence aboard the human command ship had become a symbol of the growing alliance between species. "My people survived the Krogar occupation for over a year," she said quietly. "We will not be intimidated by their threats now." "It's not intimidation," Torres replied. "It's desperation. And desperate enemies are the most dangerous kind." She activated the communication system, sending a priority signal to every ship in the human fleet and every allied commander across dozens of star systems. "All senior commanders, emergency strategic conference in 1 hour. We have new intelligence that changes everything." What followed was the largest multi-species military conference in galactic history. Representatives from 19 different civilizations gathered via quantum-encrypted communication channels to discuss a threat that endangered them all. The Krogar had revealed their willingness to commit genocide rather than accept defeat. "The technical specifications are clear," reported Dr. Chun, head of the Human Xenotechnology Division. "These weapons can be deployed by automated systems, making surgical strikes against launch facilities ineffective. If we attack Krogar Prime conventionally, they will execute their threat." Fleet Commander Zorth of the Carthaki Republic, his crystalline features reflecting the tactical displays, spoke with characteristic bluntness. "Then, we find another way. The Krogar have underestimated us before." "What do you propose?" asked Admiral Torres. It was Commander Park, the tactical genius who had helped design the Liberation Campaign, who provided the answer. "We don't attack Krogar Prime," she said simply. "We take it." The plan that emerged over the following 18 hours was audacious, even by human standards. Instead of a conventional assault, they would execute the largest infiltration operation in military history. Special Forces teams would be inserted into Krogar Prime through civilian shipping channels, resistance networks, and covert transport vessels. Their mission: neutralize the planet killer weapons and disable command and control systems before the main fleet arrived. The operation would require cooperation between human special forces, alien resistance movements, and defectors from within the Krogar military itself. It was the kind of complex, multi-layered strategy that the rigid Krogar command structure would never consider, which made it their best hope of success. Captain Elena Vasquez led Alpha Team through the maintenance tunnels of Krogar Prime's primary weapons facility, her team's powered armor muffled by sound-dampening fields. Behind her, 6 of the most experienced Special Forces operators in human space moved like ghosts through the facility's underbelly. Ahead of them, their Krogar contact waited with detailed schematics of the facility's layout. Subcommander Kixtar had been planning his defection for months, horrified by his government's increasingly extreme tactics. When human agents made contact 3 weeks earlier, he had jumped at the chance to prevent genocide. "The primary control center is 40 meters ahead," he whispered, his translator rendering his words in perfect English. 6 guards, automated defenses, and quantum-encrypted command links to the weapon systems. "Security protocols?" Vasquez asked. "Biometric scanners, neural pattern recognition, and command authorization codes that change every 6 minutes. Vasquez smiled beneath her helmet. "Good thing we brought insurance." The insurance was Dr. Sarah Kim, a computer specialist whose neural interface had been modified with quantum processing nodes. She could crack Krogar security systems by literally thinking in their machine language, a capability that had required experimental surgery and months of training. "Neural patterns mapped," Kim reported as she connected her interface to the facility systems. "I'm seeing the authorization structure now. Give me 30 seconds. Similar operations were taking place simultaneously across Krogar Prime. Teams targeted weapons facilities, communication centers, and command bunkers with surgical precision. The resistance networks that human agents have been building for months activated in perfect coordination, providing intelligence, safe houses, and diversionary attacks. On the surface, Trooper Jacksmill of the Krogar security forces noticed the first signs of trouble when his patrol encountered a group of civilian workers moving through a restricted area after curfew. When he challenged them, they produced proper identification, but something about their movements seemed wrong. "Base, this is Patrol 7, he radioed. "I need verification on civilians in Sector 12. The response never came. Unknown to Jacksmill, human electronic warfare specialists had been systematically infiltrating Krogar communication networks for weeks. When the signal came to begin the operation, they simply turned off the security force's ability to communicate with each other or call for reinforcement. In the primary command bunker beneath Krogar Prime's capital, Supreme Commander Vextar first became aware of the crisis when his aide burst into the war room with reports of system failures across multiple facilities. Communications are down planet-wide, the aide reported. Security forces cannot coordinate responses. And, sir, we're receiving reports of infiltration at all 6 weapons facilities. Vextar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed the implications. How is this possible? Our security systems were designed to be impenetrable. Unknown, sir. The infiltrators appear to have detailed knowledge of our procedures and technology. Before Vextar could respond, the main tactical display flickered and changed, showing an image that made his blood freeze. Admiral Torres appeared on the screen, but she wasn't broadcasting from a ship in space. She was standing in what appeared to be a Krogar military facility. Supreme Commander Vextar, she said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute victory. As you can see, human forces have successfully infiltrated your weapons facilities. Your planet killer devices are now under our control. The display split to show multiple views of human special forces teams standing in various command centers, their weapons trained on captured Krogar personnel. This is impossible, Vextar whispered. You made the same mistake many others have made, Torres continued. You assume that because humans come from a primitive rim world, we must be primitive ourselves. You failed to understand that we've had to become very, very good at warfare to survive on a planet that actively tries to kill its inhabitants. She paused, her expression softening slightly. But, despite your crimes, we're not here for revenge. We're here to end the cycle of oppression and conquest that has plagued this galaxy for too long. Vextar's hands moved toward the emergency controls that would manually trigger the planet killer weapons, but he stopped when he realized human soldiers were already in the room with him. Captain Vasquez and her team had infiltrated even the most secure facility on Krogar Prime. Stand down, Supreme Commander, Vasquez said quietly. Your war is over. As the last Krogar resistance crumbled, human and Allied forces began the complex process of dismantling the Dominion's infrastructure of oppression. Slave labor camps were liberated, conquered populations were returned to self-governance, and war criminals were prepared for trial by a galactic tribunal. But, perhaps most importantly, the weapons that had threatened to destroy entire civilizations were systematically dismantled under the supervision of multi-species technical teams. The galaxy would never again face the threat of species-wide extinction at the hands of a single militaristic empire. 3 months later, Admiral Torres stood on the observation deck of a newly constructed Galactic Liberation Memorial Station, watching as ships from dozens of species came and went into space around Thesha Prime. The station had been built from salvaged Krogar vessels, transformed from instruments of war into a monument to cooperation and mutual aid. Ambassador Zalthara joined her at the viewport, her blue skin now healthy and vibrant after months of recovery from her ordeal. The Council of Free Worlds has formally ratified the Mutual Defense Treaty, she reported. 43 species have committed to the alliance. And humanity's role? Torres asked. Exactly what it has always been. Protectors of those who cannot protect themselves. Though I suspect the galaxy will think twice before threatening any member of our alliance. Torres smiled, thinking about the message that would soon be broadcast across known space. The galaxy had learned that when someone called for aid, the Deathworlders would answer. But, more than that, they had learned that humans fought not for conquest or glory, but for the simple principle that all sentient beings deserve the right to live free from oppression. In the months and years that followed, the legend of the Liberation War would spread far beyond the species that had participated in it. Stories would be told of the humans who had traveled thousands of light years to fight for aliens they had never met, who had risked everything to defend the principle that strength should protect the weak rather than exploit them. The Krogar Dominion was gone, its empire replaced by a confederation of free worlds united by mutual respect and shared values. The galaxy had been reminded that technological advancement and military might meant nothing without the moral courage to use them for good. And when future tyrants arose to threaten the peace, they would face not just the righteous fury of their victims, but the combined might of an alliance that had learned the most important lesson in galactic history. When good people stand together, no evil can prevail. The age of conquest was over. The age of liberation had begun. Far from the celebration, in the depths of space between galaxies, automated monitoring stations detected the faint signals of approaching ships. They were unlike anything in the databases, larger than any known vessel, built with technologies that seemed to bend the laws of physics themselves. But those were challenges for another day. For now, the galaxies celebrated the victory of cooperation over domination, of justice over might, and of the simple truth that when someone asks for aid, the best of humanity will always answer. The Deathworlders had kept their promise. They had come with an armada, and they had brought liberation with them.